Usually, when we talk about mapping something out, there is this underlying expectation of precision. Like, you look at a map of a city and the lines are drawn in bold blacking.
Right, it is very fixed.
Exactly. There is Main Street, there is First Avenue. The cartographer points to a line and says, that is the boundary. It is a grid and it is permanent.
And it is comforting to have boundaries visible like that.
Yeah.
We navigate physical space relying heavily on the assumption that things are neatly categorized and stable.
But the moment you try to step into the world of the human mind, specifically a mind navigating profound trauma, shifting identity, and, well, the desperate search for meaning, that cartographer's compass just starts spinning wildly.
Oh, absolutely. The grid just dissolves.
Right. We are suddenly looking at an internal landscape that is incredibly murky, vast, and constantly overlapping.
Because a mind does not operate on a grid system. It operates in ecosystems. When you apply the rigidity of a map to the fluidity of psychological survival, you miss the actual architecture of how a person keeps themselves alive.
And that brings us to the source material we are taking a deep dive into today. We are looking at this fascinating, deeply detailed creative reflection document. It is dated June 25, 2026.
Yeah, the Tira document.
Exactly, titled Tira Subsubpersonalities.pdf. It maps out the internal world of a persona or character named Teresa Walder, who goes by Tiramisu. But, and this is crucial, this is not merely a character study.
No, not at all.
It is a rigorous exploration of how a mind fractures under immense societal and psychological pressure and then actively rebuilds itself into 11 distinct inner voices or sub-subpersonalities to process fear, generate meaning, and ultimately discover wisdom.
The level of psychological fidelity in this text is just remarkable. We're essentially examining a localized system of self-preservation that has evolved over time into a thriving, highly functional internal council.
Okay, let's unpack this. The mission of this deep dive is to deconstruct this complex inner ecosystem. Because whether you are a writer looking for world-building inspiration or just someone insanely curious about psychology and identity, this breakdown is going to provide massive aha moments about how we all juggle different versions of ourselves.
Yeah, because we all do it.
Right. So let's start right at the center. The document introduces the overarching persona as Tira the orphan. But the text is very careful to clarify that orphan here does not just mean a lack of parents.
That distinction changes the entire framing of the trauma, honestly.
Right. It defines an orphan as someone whose original context was violently taken from them, forcing them to rebuild meaning from fragments.
Losing a parent is a specific, devastating kind of grief. But losing your context, like your cultural background, your religious certainty, your unquestioned placement in society, that is a total destabilization of reality.
Yeah.
When your context is stripped away, you don't just lose your family. You lose the mirror that society holds up to tell you who you are.
The text gives us some of that backstory to explain the loss of context. Tira is shaped by the fall of something called the Olbaid.
Right.
She experiences displacement to an orphanage, and she has an orange eye, which is treated by the world as a highly stigmatized identity marker. And to cope with all of this, he turns to a diary and, interestingly, what the text calls necromancy.
What's fascinating here is that if we look at the Olbaid as her society's foundational belief system, its fall is the ultimate psychological rupture.
Total collapse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the turn to necromancy is a fascinating mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't read that as literal magic, but as psychological necromancy.
Oh, wow. Wait, explain that.
Well, when your present context is destroyed, the natural trauma response is to try to resurrect dead belief systems. It is the attempt to pull answers from a past that has already passed away.
That makes so much sense.
Oh.
But the document makes this definitive, powerful statement. Tira's core is not sadness. Her core is meaning-making after rupture. She is the part of the self that asks, what is beneath this feeling? What remains when I stop pretending the answer is simple?
And this highlights why trauma necessitates this specific kind of internal fragmentation. When a child experiences a total rupture of context, especially a child with a stigmatized identity like an orange eye, they are being interpreted by the outside world long before they have the vocabulary to explain themselves.
They don't even have a chance.
Right. The world looks at that eye or that orphan status and assigns a narrative. You are broken. You are cursed. You are an outsider.
It is relentless.
So to survive the crushing weight of those external narratives, the child's psyche must learn to observe safely. She cannot afford the vulnerability of a unified reactive self. She has to step back, fracture into different observational lenses, and become a meaning maker out of sheer psychological necessity.
It's like a house is bulldozed, and instead of just mourning the house or trying to painstakingly glue the broken bricks back together, Tira took those broken bricks and built 11 different lanterns. But looking at it like that, does this mean her entire existence is just an elaborate, perpetual defense mechanism?
Well, in the beginning, yes. The fragmentation starts as a way to handle overwhelming, threatening data. But what this document illustrates is a system that has transcended mere defense.
So she isn't just throwing up shields anymore.
Precisely. She is utilizing these 11 lanterns to achieve a higher state of processing. The defense mechanism has evolved into a highly sophisticated philosophical tool.
I want you listening to think about how this applies when we face our own ruptures, like when you lose a job that defined you, or go through a terrible breakup, or experience a crisis of faith.
Your instinct is usually to desperately reconstruct the exact same context.
Exactly. We want the old house back. But Tira's method suggests that meaning must be actively manufactured from the fragments instead of forcing them back into a shape that no longer fits.
And to manufacture that meaning, Tira employs a very specific operational philosophy.
Right. The document calls this the wisdom onion model, and it directly contrasts this model with the concept of a ladder. The text notes that a ladder implies upward motion. It implies ranking, status, and mastery. You climb the ladder, you conquer the rungs, and you leave the bottom behind.
Which is such a common way we view self-improvement.
Totally. But Tira's model is an onion. It is entirely inward, and it is gentle.
The psychological brilliance of rejecting the ladder metaphor cannot be overstated. A ladder suggests that your past selves, your lower rungs, are something to be stepped on. It inherently devalues the versions of you that survived the trauma in the first place.
That is such a good point.
But an onion, the biological reality of an onion is that every single layer is made of the exact same material as the center.
So the outer layers aren't fake or wrong.
Precisely. They are fully true, necessary layers of protection and growth. They just aren't the center.
The text outlines 5 specific layers to this onion. Layer 1 is thoughtful action. Layer 2 is discernment in relationship. Layer 3 is inner awareness. Layer 4 is heart wisdom. And layer 5 at the very center is paradox and presence.
Notice the progression there. It moves from how you operate mechanically in the physical world to how you interact with others, to turning the gaze inward.
Right, moving deeper.
Then to emotional integration, and finally arriving at a state where you accept that you will never have all the answers. The center isn't a vault of absolute truth. It is the capacity to sit with paradox.
But the document is also incredibly self-aware because it immediately identifies the shadow side of this philosophy, the danger of endless peeling.
Yes, the shadow spiral.
It warns that a mind like this might overanalyze, hesitate, and withdraw. The text humorously notes that each layer can sting the eyes a little. It literally states she might distrust simple joy because it feels insufficiently examined.
This is the profound trap for highly intelligent people who have survived trauma. You get so skilled at deconstructing your environment to detect threats that you forget how to let an experience just exist.
Wow, yeah.
Experience a moment of pure joy, laughing with a friend, enjoying a beautiful day, and the meaning maker brain instantly kicks in. Why am I laughing?
Yeah.
Is this joy authentic, or is it a manic defense against my underlying grief?
Oh, that is so real. And within seconds, the joy is dead. You have peeled the onion until there is nothing left but tears on the cutting board.
Exactly. You forget that wisdom is actually meant to be lived, not just relentlessly investigated.
So what does this all mean for us? It means we have to be careful not to mistake complexity for wisdom. An answer isn't automatically more true just because it is agonizingly complicated to arrive at. And you cannot demand certainty when you finally reach the core. So how does a mind actually peel these layers without tearing the whole onion apart? Tira uses specific tools, which are her 11 sub-subpersonalities. Let's look at the tension that creates the first group, which the text calls the intellectual vanguard.
The thinkers.
Right. When a mind faces a terrifying unknown, a trauma, or a taboo, the natural biological response is panic. How does the mind prevent itself from panicking in the dark?
It builds a character whose sole purpose is to walk into the dark. In Tira's system, that is Briarwood, she is known as the heretic. Her core domain is fear, forbidden knowledge, and ethics.
Briar investigates the taboo, and the document gives us specific symbols for each of these voices. Briar is symbolized by black magic research journals, demonology texts, and beef stew, which is such a jarring combination. Why is the mind pairing the dark arts with a hearty bowl of beef stew?
It is about grounding the terrifying. If you only have demonology, you get lost in the terror. Beef stew is survival food. It is caloric, warm, and rooted in the earth.
That makes a lot of sense.
The psychology behind this pairing tells us that Breyer isn't studying the dark arts to be edgy or destructive. She is studying them to sustain the system. She looks at the things society is terrified of and asks, is this actually dangerous to us, or is it merely culturally forbidden?
That distinction is everything, and her growth arc shows that beautifully. She starts as an immature mechanism. If people fear it, it must be studied. It is just a raw compulsion toward the taboo. But mature Breyer realizes that knowledge is power only when paired with ethics.
That is the evolution from rebellion to philosophy. Breyer neutralizes fear by turning on the lights in the basement. But she learns that just because you found a monster doesn't mean you should let it out.
Okay, so Breyer is in the basement gathering this dark, terrifying data. But raw data is just chaos. Who organizes it so it doesn't overwhelm the system?
That requires a completely different mechanism. That is Connie McLeod, the analyst.
Connie is all about pattern recognition, translating chaos into structure. Her symbols are the white knight chess piece and tea and scones.
The aesthetic shift is intentional. We move from the messy, dark basement to a refined, structured parlor. Connie is the ability to sit back, detach emotionally, and observe the board.
But her growth arc is interesting, too. She goes from thinking answers are obvious to realizing patterns are only useful if they help people move wisely.
Right, because pure logic without application is useless to survival.
But if Connie is building this rigid logical structure and Breyer is feeding her controversial data, how does the mind know the structure is actually sound? If you build a pattern out of fear, it might be a false pattern.
To prevent false patterns, a healthy mind introduces friction. It builds a stress tester.
Enter Eleni Kennedy Vlahos, EKV, the debater, symbolized by a golden laurel and a Greek gyro.
The gyro is messy, spicy, and complex, perfect for combatant. Eleni is the intellectual friction. She looks at Connie's neat little chessboard and says, prove to me that this pattern holds up under pressure.
Her stated fear is weak ideas gaining power just because nobody questioned them. But a mind constantly debating itself sounds utterly exhausting. If Eleni's original philosophy is that weak ideas deserve to die, doesn't this system just argue itself into burnout?
It absolutely would, if not for the fourth member of the vanguard. When Breyer, Connie, and Eleni are locked in a room, spiraling into the weeds of an endless argument, the mind needs a voice that can pull all the way back.
That is Marco Moon, the sage. He provides long-view synthesis and eldritch wisdom, symbolized by old academic robes, a moonstone ring, and mushroom barley stew.
Barley and mushrooms grow slowly and sustain over long winters. Marco represents the elder perspective. He asks what remains true across decades, not just in the heat of the current debate.
So his arc is moving from speaking mysteriously just to sound wise to realizing true wisdom actually clarifies mystery. I love that.
Me too.
Let's run a simulation to see how this vanguard actually functions. Imagine Tira faces a massive, sudden crisis, let's say a sudden eviction or the loss of her livelihood. How do these four process that threat sequentially?
It happens in milliseconds. First, the panic hits. Breyer immediately steps forward and looks directly at the worst-case scenario. We might be homeless. What does that actually look like? Let's study the absolute worst outcome so it stops being a vague shadow.
Okay, right.
Once the fear is quantified, Connie takes that data and maps it. Okay, based on past financial patterns, we have exactly 3 weeks of resources. Here is the grid of our options.
And then Eleni steps in to attack Connie's grid. She says, your pattern relies on asking a friend for a loan. That friend is unreliable. Your plan is weak. We need a better contingency.
Exactly. The friction refines the survival plan. And while they are arguing over the logistics, Marco zooms out and says, we have survived greater losses than this 10 years ago. This is a moment of transition, not the end of our timeline.
It is like having a fully staffed defense and R&D department inside your own head.
That is exactly what it is.
But with Eleni's combativeness and Breyer's dark research, doesn't the system risk becoming incredibly cold and detached? If this vanguard runs the entire show, the mind becomes a fortress of pure intellect.
Yes. The text actually anticipates that exact danger. If Tira only had these four, she would be a cold, calculating machine. The vanguard manages logic and fear, but logic cannot quantify grief or joy or nostalgia. If a mind only has a vanguard, it survives, but it is sterile.
Which brings us to Section 4, the emotional and creative defenders, the feelers. To prevent that sterility, she has a completely different set of voices. Let's explore the tension between logic and memory. Connie, the analyst, can track the factual sequence of an event, But facts don't capture what an event actually meant to the person.
Connie will tell you that it rained on Tuesday at 4 p.m., but she cannot tell you how the rain smelled or how it made you feel completely alone. For that, the mind needs an archivist of the heart.
That is Garrett Lisson, the yearbook editor. His core domain is preserving emotional history and small moments. He is symbolized by an enchanted camera, scrapbooks, and blueberry pancakes.
We have to look at the psychology of the nostalgic carbs in this entire quadrant. Pancakes, brownies, squash soup.
It is such a cozy, atmospheric quadrant, very nostalgic.
Yes, and there is a reason for that. When the mind is dealing with profound, often pre-verbal trauma, it craves the neurochemical safety of childhood comfort. Garrett uses this comfort to save the emotional evidence that logic discards as irrelevant.
His deepest fear is realizing no one recorded what mattered. I think we can all relate to that. Think about when you act like Garrett, desperately saving the photo of a moment so you don't lose the feeling.
But there is another tension here, beyond just saving memories. Connie wants to structure everything, and Leah wants to debate everything until it is crystal clear.
Right.
But we have all experienced a moment of transcendence, maybe listening to a piece of music that moves you to tears. And if someone leans over and tries to scientifically explain the chord progression that is manipulating your dopamine receptors, you just want to scream.
Stop, let it be magic.
Exactly. So who protects the magic in this system?
Here's where it gets really interesting. The mind deploys a protector of ambiguity. Haley Gardner, who goes by Haven, the alternative. Her core concept is unexplained feeling and indie identity, symbolized by a battered sketchbook, vinyl records, and brownies.
She is the rebel of the system.
Yeah, the text explicitly says she feels being flattened by explanation. She is allergic to clarity.
Haven is the necessary antagonist to Connie and Eleni. If we connect this to the bigger picture, she stands in front of the profound, unquantifiable experiences of life and says, "Do not touch this. If you put this under a microscope, you will kill it."
She wants to keep the mystery alive. But a mind cannot just live in raw, unexplained experiences. We inherently try to make sense of our lives. We tell ourselves stories.
Which introduces Hannah Page, the bookworm. She translates raw experience into narrative and mythology.
Symbolized by a reading journal and butternut squash soup. Hannah gives the trauma a narrative arc, which provides meaning. Think about when you recall a childhood memory. Do you act like Garrett saving the raw photo or Hannah turning it into a story?
Probably a bit of both. But the text highlights a severe shadow side to Hannah, the danger of over-narrativizing people into characters.
Right.
This is a very common, very dangerous psychological habit. To make our chaotic lives feel safe, we cast the people around us into rigid roles. We decide someone is the traitor, the savior, or the comic relief. It makes the story of our life easier to read.
But real people are incredibly complex.
Exactly. When a friend acts out of the character archetype you have assigned them, the narrative breaks. And you feel betrayed, not because of what they did, but because they ruined the script you wrote for them.
Wow, so Hannah's mature arc is learning that stories guide us, but people must be allowed to surprise the plot.
Beautifully said. Now, beneath all of these stories, beneath the memories and the desperate protection of magic, there is an even deeper layer, a frequency that the vanguard cannot even hear.
Pre-verbal signaling.
Right. Before an emotion becomes a thought that Connie can analyze or story that Hannah can write, it is just a raw symbol.
That is Madeline MacDonald, Maddie, the daydreamer. She deals in dreams, pre-verbal feelings, and nocturnal imagination, symbolized by a massive dream journal, ethereal cottagecore, and also blueberry pancakes.
Maddie operates in the realm of color, temperature, and vague dread. She catches the raw physiological data. The danger with Maddie, which her growth arc addresses, is the belief that if I felt it, it must be true.
Yeah, just because you feel intense anxiety doesn't mean the world is objectively ending. The feeling is real, like your heart rate is spiking, but the interpretation might be completely false.
Exactly. Maddie learns to honor the raw signal without treating it as an undeniable fact. She catches the feeling and then hands it over to the rest of the council to interpret.
Let's run another scenario. Imagine Tira is overwhelmed by a sudden wave of intense nostalgia when visiting her childhood neighborhood. The friction in this quadrant is wild.
Oh, it would be chaotic.
Garrett is desperately trying to memorize the exact slant of the sun on the pavement. Hannah is immediately trying to turn the feeling into a tragic story about lost innocence.
And Haven is fighting Hannah, demanding she stop ruining the raw emotion with a narrative.
Right. And Maddie is just drowning in the pure, unarticulated ache of the past.
That level of internal noise is deafening. You have the vanguard arguing over logistics and fear, and the defenders drowning in memory and emotion. A system this vast needs anchors, or else it will float away into dreams or spiral into endless debates.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 5, the grounding and protective forces. The anchors.
Yeah.
The system needs to physically root itself. The first anchor is Leah Wiskath, the punk girl. Her core concept is mycelial kindness and anti-pretty care, symbolized by wild mushroom pasta and a black journal with vines.
Mycelium is a brilliant metaphor here. Mycelium lives underground, in the absolute dark of an ecosystem. Its ecological function is to break down decay, rot, and death, and quietly turn it into nutrients that connect and feed the entire forest.
It is the gritty work.
Yes, it isn't a beautiful blooming flower. It is gritty, necessary, invisible work.
I understand the mycelium aspect, but I have to push back hard on this idea of anti-pretty care. The text says she is a thorned flower and her shadow side is rejecting comfort before it can reject her.
Right.
I am looking at this and thinking, isn't this just a fancy way of saying she pushes people away? We all know people who pride themselves on brutal honesty, but they are really just using the honesty as an excuse to be brutal. Isn't Leah's anti-pretty care just a toxic defense mechanism masquerading as a personality trait?
That is a highly perceptive challenge. On the surface, yes, it looks like simple avoidance. But we have to look at the mechanism of a traumatized mind. Leah represents the militant defense of boundaries for someone whose softness was repeatedly exploited.
Okay, I see where you're going.
When Tira was judged for her orange eye, when her original context was destroyed, open vulnerability became a lethal liability. If you are soft, the world will crush you.
So the care has to put on armor. Why must kindness have thorns? Because of survival.
Exactly. Leah wears leather, she acts blunt, she puts up thorns. She communicates, I will care for you, I will make sure we survive, but do not mistake my care for weakness you can exploit.
That makes sense.
You are right that the shadow side is toxic. She becomes so terrified of appearing soft that she rejects genuine affection. She rejects the hug before the person has a chance to pull away, guaranteeing she is never the one left vulnerable.
So her maturation is realizing that true kindness does not require a hostile costume to be strong, caring without becoming tame.
Yes.
So Leah garbs the perimeter and the boundaries. But who regulates the internal temperature of the mind? When Eleni is screaming about logic and Maddie is drowning in dreams, who turns down the volume?
Petra, the amethyst girl. Crystal calm, emotional regulation, symbolized by lavender shortbread and geodes.
Her quote in the document is stunning. Stillness is not emptiness. It is a place where the signal gets clear.
Petra represents the shift from fragile peace to resilient peace. Fragile peace is what we usually strive for, a state where nothing bothers us, the room is quiet, and everything is fine. But the moment a crisis hits, fragile peace shatters entirely.
Because it relies on external conditions being perfect.
Right. Petra's mature state is resilient peace. It is the capacity to allow the internal crisis to happen, to let Briar panic and let Haven cry, to feel the reverberations of the storm and remain deeply anchored in the body anyway.
Which leaves the final and perhaps the most structurally vital piece of this entire mental architecture. Regan Lee, the archivist, the 11th witness.
Regan is the ultimate synthesizer of the system.
Her core role is memory architecture and continuity, symbolized by dark chocolate cherry scones and a red threaded ledger. We talked earlier about Garrett saving emotional moments and Hannah saving stories. How is Regan different?
Garrett saves snapshots. Hannah writes isolated fables. Regan takes those snapshots and fables and sews them into a continuous timeline. For a trauma survivor, continuity is the holy grail of psychological healing. Severe trauma creates amnesia. It violently fragments a life into a before and an after.
The text explicitly says, without Regan, Tira has symbols, dreams, arguments, and stories. With Regan, Tira has continuity.
Regan sits in the center of the mind with her red thread. She takes Briar's terrifying research, Connie's grids, Leah's defensive thorns, and Maddie's vague dreams, and she files them chronologically. She decides what the whole system cannot afford to lose, effectively knitting 11 fractured shards back into a single, cohesive human timeline.
It is breathtaking to see it laid out like this. So let's put all 11 players in the board. Section 6, integration, the complete inner council. What happens when these 11 voices speak at once?
It is the wisdom onion model fully operationalized.
Let me synthesize the big picture section of the document and read the sequence of how they convene because it brings everything together. When a moment occurs, Briar asks what fear is hiding. Connie asks what pattern is forming. Eleni asks what idea survives scrutiny. Garrett asks what moment must be remembered. Haven asks what mystery must remain breathing. Hannah asks what story is unfolding.
The layers just keep building.
Right. Then Leah asks what kindness looks like with firm boundaries. Maddie asks what the underlying dream is trying to say. Marco asks what time and myth reveal. Petra asks what steadiness feels like in the physical body. And finally, Reagan asks what must be preserved for the future.
Imagine having the neurological capacity to process a single interpersonal conflict through all 11 of those lenses before you react. That is the absolute antithesis of a trauma-induced knee-jerk reaction.
And it brings us full circle to Tira's deepest wound, her identity being interpreted for her because of her orange eye, orphanhood, and Old Maid heritage. Society projected its own narratives onto her. This entire 11-part council is her profound rebellion against that external projection. If the world is going to interpret her unfairly, she built a machine to interpret the world with unshakable, exhaustive fairness.
Having 11 distinct voices might sound to a layman like a fractured, broken pathology, but what this document proves, and if we bring this back to the wisdom onion model, is that these voices represent radical psychological resilience. It is an ecosystem functioning exactly as it should.
A forest isn't broken because a storm rolls through or because mycelium breaks down rot in the dark.
It is simply alive. This raises an important question, actually. Do we all have a similar, if less defined, counsel in our own heads?
We must, though maybe we don't listen to all of them. I mean, look at your own inner counsel. Are you missing a Petra to ground you? Do you let an immature Eleni dominate your thoughts with endless, exhausting argument?
The work of internal integration is not about silencing the conflicting voices in your head. It is about helping them mature so they can collaborate rather than compete. They represent the ultimate triumph of self-compassion.
It really is beautiful. Tara realizes she doesn't need final certainty to be real. Her mature vow in the text captures this beautifully. She says, "I will seek truth without abandoning tenderness. I will trust that wisdom unfolds in layers not because I'm incomplete, but because I am alive."
That is just incredible.
So when we lose a job or a relationship or a foundational context, we don't have to try to build the exact same house out of the rubble. We can peel the onion. So to briefly recap this incredible journey, we went from a fragmented orphan to a master of the wisdom onion, guided by 11 distinct, beautifully flawed, but growing inner voices.
It's been a wild ride.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. It is a detail entirely rooted in the source material, but we saved it for the end. It centers around Reagan Lee, the archivist, and a chilling quote attributed to her. She says, "What we remember becomes a map. What we omit becomes a ghost."
A map is only functional if it shows the entire terrain, including the dark, terrifying forests.
Exactly. I want you to deeply consider your own internal archivist. What truths, what embarrassing memories, or what painful layers of your own onion are you purposefully omitting from your daily life because they don't fit the neat, comfortable story you want to tell about yourself?
We all omit things.
We do. And by actively omitting them, what ghosts are you inadvertently creating to haunt your own inner ecosystem? Keep peeling the onion, keep interrogating your own counsel, and most importantly, stay curious. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us. Take care.